Arcana Gothic 4. It certainly seems like one of those weird, obscure RPGs on the Xbox 360 that just no one talks about. But unlike maybe like Dragon's Dogma or Kingdoms of Amalur, which were good, this one is completely obscure for a very good reason. It's just flat out awful. The story, which you probably won't be seeing too much of because going through an hour-long tutorial yet again would have been way too depressing for me to even be bothered with. It's about some lazy shepherd who finally gets off his ass and proposes to the girl of his dreams. While his back is turned and he's out planning the honeymoon, however, his entire village, her included, are slain, and now he's on a quest of generic revenge to get back at the king who supposedly ordered the attack. And from then on out, it's basically getting stopped every 10 feet, being told there's some roadblock in your way before you can go explore the rest of the world. And that's a massive problem because this game claims to be an open world RPG. Now, as a fan of large, non-linear action RPGs, I have to take further problem with this game claiming to be open world and non-linear because it basically is linear. Sure, there are a few open world hub bits to each section of the map that you unlock, but they're often sandwiched in between narrow paths, and even when they're not, with the exception of a few collectibles hidden like in the most obscure corners of the map, there's nothing out there to see. So yes, while in some areas of the map it is more open than others, there's no effective real reason for it to be. Speaking of how awkward the environment is, despite being a quote-unquote open-world adventure where you can explore wherever you want to go, you can't even jump on rocks to forge your own path because they're all made out of oil. Seriously, jumping on rocks you automatically slide off, and actually led to a very awkward death I wish I was recording. Seriously, you're just gonna have to take my word on this, because I jumped on a rock that was 3 feet above my starting position, abruptly slid back down, and then immediately died. Because I guess for whatever reason, the game decided that 3 feet was enough to completely murder someone from falling damage. Which is in this game, which is even more awkward because if you go off the beaten path, you're going to slip off a bit of terrain and basically kill yourself. So, yeah, exploration in this game, not fun. And while there's a decent amount of subquests in each area, it feels like you kind of have to go through all of them. At least in the areas I got through, because they ultimately felt like they all tied together in order to advance far enough so that I could break down the barrier and move on to the next section of the map. And that really takes away from exactly how open the gameplay is to how much you actually want to take part in it. Speaking of the gameplay, while it is an action RPG, it is handled in a really awkward and janky manner. First and foremost, the combat. While you have a large option of different weapons, two-handed swords, one-handed swords and shields, bows and magic. Okay, well, it's basically your standard fare, but at least it tried to be competent. The combat itself is just awkward and bad. First and foremost, the AI is completely stupid. If you stand on a rock, they have no idea where you are, and will basically try and chase you, and then when they realize they can't get you, they run back to their spawn point. Hit detection seems to be more of a suggestion than anything in this game, as standing 10 feet away from your opponent after they swing can still mean that potentially you get hit, and yet despite that, the ultimate strategy to defeating any opponent is to slowly walk backwards while they try and hit you, because they will more often than not whiff, unless the frame rate stutters and they just decide you are in its hitbox for whatever reason, which happens, because they don't seem to get that you're just slowly ambling backwards. Oh yeah. And if you were the kind of person who thought ranged attacks in Fable were broken, this game laughs at that and then says, "We can make it even more broken!" Seriously, there is no reason to ever play a melee class. Magic has its perks because of status ailments you can apply to your opponents, such as stun or setting them on fire for prolonged damage. But seriously, just stand back, slowly walk backwards, and just keep chucking arrows at your opponent and they will go down without ever hitting you. It is ridiculously easy and you don't ever have to actually try dodging. Now, to complement the array of weapons in this game, there are skill trees, and for the most part they are kind of useless. Sure, you do get a few extra abilities, although they're not really all that special, but a lot of them are just very, very minor stat increases. And I'm just going to take offense to one of these skill trees because it's very clearly labeled stealth, and if you take this, you can quote-unquote sneak, but it affects literally nothing. It's just a completely useless skill path that you can go down for whatever reason. And that's probably the biggest example of what this game is. It's just awkward and nonsensical in how it works. I mean, yeah, it feels like it's trying to sort of work in a specific way, but it just goes about it in such a way that it's completely non-functioning in any real enjoyable manner. The overall presentation of this game is pretty awkward and, well, just flat out bad. Visually, the characters look awkward. The overall frame rate not only affects gameplay, but it just makes it unpleasant to have your character stutter around. The animation is completely janky, and there's not really a wide variety of environments or enemies. Oh, and fun fact, you know how games have pop-in when you enter an environment too quickly and stuff needs to load around you? Yeah, this game has pop-out. As soon as you get close to bits of environment, it'll just despawn around you. And there's actually an important reason for this, and I've actually read this as an option in the game, which is fantastic, but apparently the game decides to despawn stuff as you get closer to it in order to help the frame rate. The frame rate, which at this point you should be able to tell, is completely awful. So yeah, not only does the frame rate affect gameplay, it affects visual stuff, and it basically completely kills immersion. So, bravo. The sound design in this game, well, probably the most positive I can talk about, is pretty much at best average and at worst laughably bad. I mean, the soundtrack itself does a decent job at what it needs to do, but most of the voice acting is fairly cringeworthy. Although on the bright side, the main character is probably the most passable voice actor they have, and, well, you know, you hear him the most, so at least I guess I can round out the audio package as competent, and that's about as enthusiastic as you're getting from me in regards to this game. And virtually all replayability in this game comes from the side quests, which are pretty stock for an RPG. Oh, but wait. You know those games that have, like, starting quests that you get at the beginning of the game, and it involves collecting tons and tons of generic things that you gotta search high and low for and cover the entire game map to get? Well, don't worry, there isn't one in this game. There's 4. Yeah, there's 4 different quests to collect stupid amounts of inane crap in the most obscure corners of the map, which is really the only reason you should ever have to go off the main path in this game, because that's literally the only thing you're going to find. The fact is that they have so much of this stuff, and it's introduced so early, and you have no way to affect any of it, simply because the world is so fractured that it just becomes a painful slog to even try to collect all this stuff, or even remember that it's there, which is incredibly frustrating. Especially because it's the sole contributing factor to any form of replayability that this game has. And that's Gothic Arcana 4, a game that, honestly, I wish I left in the bargain bin I found it in. And I mean, the only reason I even picked it up is I like RPGs. And despite the fact that the Xbox 360 really doesn't have as huge an RPG library as many other systems out there, I like to explore the different ones that don't get talked about, but really this one's just bad. And I mean, say what you want about stuff like Two Worlds, at least Two Worlds made a somewhat semi-competent sequel that was at least mildly enjoyable for a while. This game is just straight up bad. So you know what, go out there, go pick up Two Worlds 2, maybe if you're a little masochistic, go get Dragon's Dogma, go get Divinity 2, go get Kingdoms of Amalur. In fact, I would recommend it because that game is badass. But skip this one. And I think I can summarize my feelings on Arcana Gothic 4 with the very first thing I said when I started playing this. And that is, I paid money for this.